Last on Everdark. Balthazar denies he is Eiros reborn, much to Daemon's disbelief and dismay. But what Daemon does not know is that the Immortals are viewed as villains for their actions in a long-ago war between the bloodlines, which happened while Daemon slept. What else has Daemon missed? Everdark, Episode 29. The Power of Revenge. Julian hid a smile as Daemon modelled the clothes he intended to wear that night. Tailored black slacks that skimmed his long, muscular legs, a black button-down shirt open at the throat, with silver and onyx cufflinks at his surprisingly elegant wrists, dress shoes with a high, polished shine, and filling it all out was his dark, curling hair and sculpted good looks. He was rather breathtaking, and Julian wished they were staying in rather than going out. The smile came from the fact that Daemon was quite insistent that all his clothes be black or white. There could be some crimson highlights, such as an inner lining to a classic suit coat or embroidery on the cuffs and collar, but most colours were verboten. It reminded Julian of his impression of Everdark as a whole, all velvety blacks and ghostly whites with pops of colour. The tailor, whose name was Manx, just Manx, no last name, circled Daemon with a critical eye. Her right hand stroked her chin as her shoes tapped, tapped, tapped on the marble floor. Julian thought he felt a slight unease from the Vampire King about whether or not she would approve of how he filled out the clothes she had brought him. She stopped in front of Daemon. She ran her hands unabashedly down his sides and tugged at the shirt to make it sit just so.
Well, I would like to tailor this further. It is a little too wide for those slim hips of yours. My understanding is that you need clothing to go out this evening in, yes?
Yes, Daemon agreed, almost meekly.
Then I shall allow you to wear this outfit tonight. When you're done with it, however, it should be returned to me for laundering and adjustment.
Manx nodded at the end of her own statement, as if this was bound to be agreeable to Daemon. Of course. More meekness from Daemon that Julian was going to love teasing him about later. Manx was just a human after all. There was no royal blood in her veins, but she was the ruler here.
Good.
Her head snapped towards Julian, who found himself standing up straighter. He slouched, according to her, hiding his good height. Again, with a critical eye, she approached him. She had brought him several off-the-rack items too. He was wearing a pair of sinfully soft jeans that felt like he could just live in them forever, and a white button-down shirt with a tan vest and matching shoes. She pulled on the vest and smoothed her hands over his shoulders.
You're easier to dress than he is. Not so tall, not so broad.
Just when Julian was starting to get a tad of a complex for not being too much of anything, though compared against Daemon, who was, he was rewarded by Manx with a,
You're just right. But still, everything can use a little tailoring. You two will turn this outfit over to me after the night is through, excluding the jeans. They're perfect.
Julian rubbed his hands over the front of his jeans.
They totally are.
She has gotten you out of the potato sacks you usually wear, Daemon remarked as he looked Julian up and down.
I don't wear potato sacks. Cargo pants and Henleys with utility vests are just practical for adventuring. Being dressed in wolfskins is not exactly a good wardrobe choice for tomb raiding,
Julian protested. He loved his cargo pants and Henleys. He was going to take a suitcase of them with him back here. Not even Daemon's disapproval would dim his adoration of them. Daemon raised an eyebrow. We will see. Come, we need to go to your home and then hunting. Where are the horses? I do not smell or hear any nearby. A frown had come to cross his lips. Julian let out a soft laugh. Sophia chuckled too. She had been sitting on a nearby couch, watching the two of them get measured and dressed. She offered to wait for her turn under Manx's critical eye until they were done, since they had places to go, while she intended to be lazy in her room. Julian was pretty sure that she wasn't really going to be lazy. Maybe she was going to look into the future or something. But he had a feeling that whatever she did would be useful.
We don't have horses, Daemon,
Julian explained, realizing then how a simple trip to his house, sans other vampires trying to kill him, would still be an adventure, or even an ordeal. Daemon had to learn everything, and Julian had to somehow explain it in a way that made sense.
I mean, we do, but we only really ride them for fun or sport. We use cars to get around. I'm sure that Balthazar is a car we can use, or maybe we should call an Uber.
Julian spied the cell phones that Balthazar had mentioned sitting in a dish near the front door. Also in the dish were 2 sets of door keys, likely for the house, and a key fob. The key fob was to a Tesla. Julian grinned. He threw 1 pair of the house keys to Daemon and a cell phone. The Vampire King caught them easily. He stared at both for long moments, twisting them in his hands. When the phone lit up, he jerked it away from his face with a growl. Julian and Sophia exchanged an amused glance.
You're gonna have so much fun showing him the world, Julian.
Sophia sauntered over to him as she said this. Leaning against his side, she added,
He'll be like a child again. All wonder and awe. It's good for him. Life before had gotten so stale.
Julian put an arm around her slender shoulders, surprised at how close to her he already felt. Though she was far older than him, she was the exact sort of little sister he would have wanted. He was pretty sure of the answer to this question, but he wanted to confirm.
You weren't around when he was, were you?
Oh no, I'm nowhere near that old.
She waved a hand.
But Seer told me all about him. She missed him so much.
Well, he's back now, and we'll find Seer too.
He hoped they would. But the question was, would Seer still be herself? Or would she have been reborn like Iros was? The 2 of them regarded Daemon as he tapped the phone, causing the light to go on and off in a fascinated fashion. He actually sniffed it at one point, and his nose wrinkled. Knowing what a badass Daemon actually was made this cat-like curiosity even more adorable.
Sophia,
Manx waved for the childlike vampire to join her.
we must get started with your measurements.
Julian squeezed her to him for a moment more before releasing his grip on her. She took a few steps away. She called over her shoulder.
Have fun. I know you will.
She then skipped to Manx. Julian tensed a little, though. Was she saying that because she truly foresaw them having fun that night? Or when she mentioned fun, did she mean danger and adventure, or... He shook himself. He couldn't worry about the future. It would come as it would come. He had enough to worry about in the present, which included getting Daemon into a car and not having him get freaked out by the experience of a motor, lights, and moving really fast. Julian went over to the Vampire King and slid an arm around his waist. He was amazed at how easy it was to touch Daemon now. There was an almost tactile need in him to touch the Vampire King. He had never been clingy around boyfriends before. He wasn't even sure they were boyfriends. So this need worried him slightly.
I'm worried that I'm comfortable around him. This is insane.
What is insane? Daemon lowered the phone.
That we're standing around here when there's a beautiful night out there, ready for us to discover.
Julian half lied. Daemon nodded. With one last fascinated glance at the slim phone, he slipped it and the keys into the pocket of his tailored trousers. The 2 of them walked out of the house together. A Tesla, snow white and sleek, was parked on the curving front drive. The car lit up when Julian pressed the unlock button. Daemon reared back, much like he had done with the phone. What is that? Daemon hissed as he stared at the Tesla like it might bite him.
That is a car. It's transportation instead of a horse. Come on, let me show you how it works.
Julian linked his hand with Daemon's and pulled the Vampire King over to the vehicle. He opened the front passenger door and gestured for Daemon to get inside. The Vampire King did not move. He stared at the plush leather interior with continuing distrust. His eyes seemed to measure the space inside and found it wanting, despite its quite gracious dimensions and considerable legroom. Daemon straightened. No, he said softly.
What?
No, we are not getting into that coffin. I have had enough of small spaces. Daemon took 2 steps back. Any inclination that Julian had had to cajole him died with that last line. He hadn't considered that Daemon might be traumatized from the years, centuries, millennia trapped in the tomb. So he shut the door and relocked the car.
I'm sorry,
he said.
I didn't even think of that. We can walk. It's only a few miles.
Daemon's nostrils were flared. and faint tremors were running through him. Julian reached over and ran his hands up and down Daemon's arms until the tremors stopped. The Vampire King did not look at him, rather stared off into the distance, clearly remembering something unpleasant. When Daemon spoke, though, it wasn't about the car or being trapped in that magical sarcophagus. It was about Julian. "I shouldn't have left you alone earlier." Julian blinked. His freak-out with the blood and Arceus seemed like ages ago already. He was sure that he would have more moments when being a vampire became more real to him than maybe he would like it to be, but at the moment he felt quite good and calm.
It's okay. I'm fine now, and...
"You do not understand." Daemon focused on his face then. "You are the one I have been waiting for, and I was not there when you needed me." Julian considered this. Would it have been better if Daemon had been there when he'd woken up? Yes, and no. Arceus understood his freak-out and could say the right things because he'd once been human. Daemon had always lived with drinking blood, or so Julian thought. He didn't actually know. But if Daemon had had another life, a different life than being a vampire, it was so long ago he likely didn't remember it.
Come on, let's walk,
Julian suggested. Julian put a hand on Daemon's lower back as he pulled out his phone with the other hand. He was about to tap in his address to find out the best way to return to Wingate when he realized he knew. He could smell his home. It was the strangest thing. He smelled leather and books and hot electronics and the faintest remnants of his parents' scents. All of those smells wrapped together was home, and he would be able to find it easily. He could almost visualize the route that he had to take, so he slipped the phone back into his pocket and started to lead the way. Balthazar's mansion was on the outskirts of town, giving the vampire lord far more open land than Wingate had, which was situated in the University Park area in the middle of the city. There were few streetlights and fewer people out near here, unlike closer to the center. Julian was grateful for that, because he realized with a start he was getting hungry.
The Everdark podcast is just a small part of what happens at Wraith Rain. We also have manga, book series, free downloads on Amazon, live streams, and of course, the serial stories that update constantly. As a small publisher, if we want to do something new, we can. We don't have to wait for anyone else's say-so but our own, and of course, our listeners and readers. We don't really use social media for updates. Instead, we do things the old-fashioned way on the Wraith Rain website and through our mailing list. The website's front page shows the latest updates and upcoming events, such as live streams. The info is always sent weekly through the mailing list as well. There is often something happening every day, so check the show notes for our links to our front page and our mailing list form.
"You are saying nothing, but you do not agree with me," Daemon said as they walked arm in arm down the street.
I think that you can't and shouldn't be the only person I rely on,
Julian finally said.
Arceus was there, and he knew exactly what was going on and how to help me.
"And you think I would not have?" Daemon's voice was neutral, but the toss of his head and slightly flared nostrils alerted Julian that he did not feel neutral about this.
Daemon, you can't be jealous of Arceus.
Julian tugged the Vampire King closer. "I enjoy Arceus, but perhaps he is too familiar with you," Daemon sniffed.
Familiar? You make it sound like I'm the son of a nobleman, and...
Julian stopped.
That is what you're saying, isn't it? Since I'm your fledgling, that I'm like royal or something.
You are royal. You are of my blood. You are the vampire prince. While that had a charming, old-fashioned tone to it on the one hand, Julian bristled at it on the other.
Arceus treats me just fine, I'll have you know. I wouldn't want him all bowing and scraping. He's totally respectful and kind to me. I don't want you saying anything to him about familiarity.
Julian growled slightly.
This has got to do with you being jealous.
You are quite direct with your wishes.
Am I too familiar as well?
That got him a smile and a shake of Daemon's head.
Good. Because remember the Emperor's new clothes? This is one of those moments.
Julian reminded him.
Arceus is my friend. He is your confessor. He practically worships the ground you walk on, and that's good, but I don't want him to treat me like that. I'm not you.
Perhaps. I do appreciate Arceus, and I am glad he was there for you. But it should have been me that you relied upon. I will not forgive myself for that. I will be more assiduous in the future." Julian suppressed a smile and a sigh. Those words had him picturing Daemon placing him in a tower shaped rather like a bird's cage and closing the door to keep him safe. Julian, of course, would be hammering at those bars in no time. So he said,
"You're the king. You're going to have to do loads of things. You're not always going to be able to be there for me."
"You only think this because of how I treated you when I first turned you." Daemon's mouth was flattened and his forehead was bunched. "You think that you cannot trust me being there. By not being there tonight, I just confirmed that."
No. Okay, maybe a little, but no at the same time.
Julian stopped at an intersection. The city was starting to come alive. There was more traffic and more people on the streets. His senses were suddenly on fire. He was smelling cologne and exhaust, body odor and oil. He heard traffic, talking, dogs barking, heartbeats, and the whoosh of blood in veins, and so much more. He curled himself closer to Daemon's body as if purely being closer to the vampire king could shield him from his own heightened senses. He studiously tried to ignore everything and everyone else. It soothed him slightly.
"Of course, part of me wants you to always be there,"
Julian confessed as he sheltered in Daemon's larger-than-life presence.
"And if you were the one saying that you wouldn't be, I'd be freaking out. I love that you're saying you want to be. I'm trying to be a good partner. I need you to know that I understand there might be times when you can't be there, that I'll figure it out on my own if I have to, and I'm okay with that."
Daemon smoothed his hands down the sides of Julian's head and kissed him gently. "Do you not know that you are the most important part of my existence? Julian, you are my treasure. You are what I will fight for, what I will protect with everything I am."
"Oh, that's...
Daemon didn't wait for any reply, but just kissed him softly again, tenderly, reverently. Julian blinked rapidly, fighting off unexpected emotions. That part inside of him that had wailed like a lost child when he'd been separated from Daemon in the beginning clamped onto those words and hugged them close. It was a part of himself that he wasn't altogether sure he was comfortable with. It reminded him of how he'd been after his parents' deaths. He'd promised himself back then that he wouldn't cling to people, that he would be all right even if stripped of everyone from his life, that he wouldn't depend upon anyone. Except that hadn't really been true. There had been Christian's parents, and of course there had been Christian himself. He would have died without his best friend 1,000,000 times over by now. But did he know Daemon enough to trust him with that kind of importance in his life? They started walking again. Neither spoke. Julian watched Daemon with a growing fascination. Who was this being walking alongside of him? On the one hand, Julian felt this complete harmony being by Daemon. There was this sense that he could and should say whatever was on his mind. He knew that Daemon was far older than him and undoubtedly far wiser. But Daemon still wanted to hear Julian's thoughts and was open to even agreeing with them. Daemon was also a predator. He'd seen that with Selene and Heath in Nightvallen, the quick and easy way that Daemon had killed them. The pleasure he'd seemed to take in doing that was disturbing, but it also drew Julian in. Would he ever kill his enemies with such eager abandon? He couldn't quite imagine it, but then he sort of could too. With powers like Daemon's, wouldn't life feel a little more like a video game than reality? Or maybe he should be drawing on the roles of superheroes and following the "with great power comes great responsibility" line. He wasn't sure. Other than the strange sensitivity to smells and sounds, he felt normal. Or rather, a little peppier than normal. And he realized at that moment he could see just as well in the darkened yards as what was under the golden pools of light created by the street lamps. Still, he didn't feel quite superpowered yet.
"When are my powers going to kick in? And which ones will they be?"
he asked. Daemon's eyebrows rose even as his lips twitched. "You are afraid of falling behind Christian?"
"Maybe a little. But he will only have Iros's gift of mind control, right? But I'll have more than one gift because you have all of them?"
Julian guessed. He hoped he had at least one gift. He hoped that there wasn't a chance he could be a dud. Daemon chuckled. "You've already started showing signs of having several of the gifts. But you've only fed once, Julian, and you've been a vampire for less than 2 days.
This is where you tell me to be patient, and that I have all the time in the world.
You do. Daemon stroked the back of Julian's hand. I am beginning to understand a little of your quickness. You rush forward.
And I try to drag you with me?
Julian grinned. You do. And while endless contemplation is not wise, quick action is not always wise either. So we are starting at level 0 with you and moving from there. Daemon made a gesture in front of them.
Level 0, huh?
Yes. And what does level 0 tell you about our surroundings? Daemon stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and people streamed around them. There were no angry words said under people's breaths, though he and Daemon were blocking their way. No one seemed to notice them at all. Julian realized that Daemon had cloaked them at some point, and he hadn't noticed. It was a good thing he had. Those red eyes of the vampire kings would have caused people to stare as they glowed in the dark like fires, but no one even glanced their way. And there were far more people around them than he'd noticed before, too. They were in the middle of town, just a block away from Wingate, following his nose and innate sense of direction, but had been so much in his head that he hadn't noticed where they actually were.
It's more than me just thinking hard. You're shielding me.
Julian realized, blinking as he thought about how, when they'd stopped earlier, he'd been bombarded with smells and sounds, but his senses were dampened down to almost normal now. Yes.
You noticed I was having trouble and you just took care of it.
Of course. I am your master, Julian. It is my duty to take care of you. Daemon's answer was forthright and without any drama, as if this was normal and right and ordinary. Julian was having a hard time processing this, though. Christian took care of him in many ways, and he tried to do the same for his best friend. But this kind of caring was unknown to him since his parents' deaths. Again, his eyes stung with tears that he refused to shed. It was ridiculous for him to be on the verge of crying twice in one night when he had not cried in years. His sensitive eyes caught sight of the tower on his house, on Wingate, the place he loved most in all the world, the place his parents had made a home for him and Christian. Seeing home brought more emotions swirling to the surface.
I don't know how to...
Julian turned away from Daemon then. He needed to compose himself. You are not used to being cared for, Daemon murmured, more to himself than Julian, or so it seemed. You have had to be so strong since
my parents died.
Julian's throat felt thick with emotions. He hadn't really thought of his parents since he'd been turned. Now their loss, and the fact that he was the same as the beings who had killed them met in his head. He shuddered and swallowed hard. Daemon stroked his back, up and down, down and up, easing the terrible tension and anger that gripped him. There was bewilderment, too. He leaned over and put his hands on his thighs. He was having a hard time breathing. It is all right, Daemon said with quiet authority.
It can't be. How can it be? I'm a vampire. I'm the thing that killed them.
He got out. Daemon was silent for long moments. Would you hate yourself for being human if human thieves or thugs had killed your parents?
No, but they were killed because they found out about vampires existing, and...
They could have found out any number of secrets that humans want to keep secret and been killed for those, Daemon gently pointed out. But not all humans would be liable for what happened to them, just like not all vampires are. And you, surely, are not, nor are Balthazar or his group. I am actually rather certain that the one that hunts us now, this Caemorn Lorsus of the Order, is responsible. Julian whipped around, shocked to know the villain of his story. Caemorn Lorsus. If he killed Julian's parents, there would be hell to pay.
If he killed them, can we get to him?
In time. Daemon stood tall and confident. His expression, though, was not one of eagerness to go after an enemy, but patience. Julian's hands clenched at his sides. All those years of being able to do nothing to prove his parents' deaths were murders and not an accident, burned inside of him, and he seethed at Daemon's seeming indifference.
But he's a threat,
Julian cried.
He wants to kill you and me both, plus our friends. He's dangerous.
He's unimaginative. Daemon disagreed.
Unimaginative? What? How does that matter? He still wants to hurt us and those we care about.
You've seen what Balthazar can do with his powers. How he wiped the vampires' minds of all memories of you in the Blood Den. Such a thing could have easily been done to your parents with a simple command, that they avoid all things vampire forevermore, Daemon pointed out, but Caemorn didn't. So that tells me something about him. He sees everything as such a threat, so he always overreacts. He thinks that this makes him look strong, but it reveals him as weak.
My parents are still dead. He might be unimaginative and weak, but he has power. He killed my parents and no one cared. He didn't pay for it. There was no justice. There must be.
Yes, you are right. Forgive me. Daemon cupped his face. But I was not there then. You were only a boy when it happened. You were only human, but not anymore. If you wish to think of your vampire nature in any way in relation to your parents, think of it like this, as a benefit. It will allow you to truly strike back at the person who took them from you. Julian's face burned with emotion and tears leaked out. Anger and agony filled. He realized then that he had not been dealing with these feelings about his parents or anything else since he'd been turned. Too much had been happening, most of it exciting and positive, for him to really think about his life now. But here he was, having a breakdown, and yet Daemon wasn't fazed in the least. Maybe he had been wrong to think that Daemon wouldn't have known how to handle him in the bathroom that morning.
I'm not alone in this. That's what you're saying? You're going to help? You won't let what happened to my parents just go because Caemorn is a vampire too?
Julian asked, more like demanded to know. Who is this Caemorn to me? Nothing. Who are you to me? Everything. And if you worry that I am acting in a brash manner towards my subjects, Caemorn is exactly the wrong person I want running a religion or having any sort of power, Daemon answered.
Yes, exactly.
He could have acted far more prudently in regards to your parents, and I am sure about many other things. He has not. He has proven himself unworthy already, even if he hadn't harmed you and sought to harm me. Julian, this will be handled. You will have all the revenge you want, Daemon promised him. His thumbs glided down Julian's cheeks, soothing the heat that flamed in them. Now breathe. Let go of this anger, at least some of it, for now. Reach for your joy in adventure. Julian sucked in the cold fall air and relished the feeling of it in his lungs. He continued doing this for long moments. His anger did recede. His lust for adventure had always been stronger. Daemon's soothing presence allowed the tension to bleed out of him too, and it was during this relaxation that he sensed the other vampires near his house. He stiffened again, but this time with alarm. Ah, I see you have noticed our friends. Fear not. They have no idea we are here, Daemon told him. Julian's vision picked out two stealthy red-limed figures. One was hiding on the roof of Wingate, while the other loitered in the back garden. But they weren't the only people coming to the house. Daemon started to frown as Julian stepped towards Wingate unconsciously. These two people's scents he would recognize anywhere. His hearing even flickered into their conversations.
Just because neither of the boys have answered their cell phones, Liz, doesn't mean there's anything wrong.
Henry Thorne, Christian's father, said with a touch of annoyance. But there was a little anxiety there too, though he didn't want to acknowledge it.
Christian and Julian live online, Henry. They're never away from their phones or computers longer than a few minutes. But I haven't gotten a response from them in 2 days.
Liz Thorne, Christian's mother, answered. He heard the tap of their shoes going up the front walk. The other vampires did too. And these vampires started moving towards Christian's parents. Julian knew, without a doubt, that these vampires intended to make Christian an orphan, just like Caemorn had made him. He was not going to let that happen. Join us next time for episode 30, Teachable Moments.
We do have one social media exception, and that is YouTube. YouTube is the easiest way we have to let people comment on podcast episodes, run polls through the community tab, take questions, and make announcements. If you're on YouTube and you want to get the news, you can subscribe to our channel, even if you prefer to listen to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or other podcast platforms.
The Everdark podcast by X Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.